Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it in the kitchen like she was commenting on the weather. No heat. No apology. Just a correction. She said I needed to stop asking for intimacy. Said it was needy. Said grown men didn't keep reaching like that when their partner was building something bigger. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what bigger meant. I nodded once and told her I understood. That was the moment she stopped looking at me and went back to her laptop, fingers moving fast, already gone. That night, nothing dramatic happened. No slammed doors. No silence thick enough to notice. We watched the same show on Netflix, the volume low, her leg pulled just far enough away that our knees didn't touch. I went to bed early. She stayed up. That used to mean something. Now it was just scheduling. I work as an analyst for an insurance firm. My days are patterns, margins, risk models. I understand what happens when a variable keeps drifting in one direction. You don't wait for the system to collapse. You adjust quietly. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. I grabbed coffee on the way to work, the same Dunkin' I'd been passing for years without stopping. I sat in the car for a minute longer than usual, engine running, watching the house through the windshield. Nothing moved. We used to do Costco together on Sundays. It was our ritual. Bulk groceries, stupid jokes in the frozen aisle, hot dogs at the end like a reward. That weekend, I didn't ask. She didn't notice. She had a pitch coming up. Another one. Her world was decks, introductions, dinners that ran late. New clothes started appearing in the closet, soft fabrics, sharp lines. Lululemon tags she didn't bother cutting off. A version of herself calibrated for rooms I wasn't invited into. I didn't accuse. I didn't follow. I didn't ask who was opening doors for her now. I just stopped being available. No check-in texts. No waiting up. No reaching across the bed, hoping for permission to exist. When I left for work, I took the Camry like always. Same route. Same radio station. But something had shifted. Not in her world. In mine. By the end of that first week, she had everything she asked for. Space. Quiet. No neediness. No pressure. She thought that was stability. She didn't understand that I wasn't pulling away. I was closing access. The first crack didn't come from her. It came from someone who had nothing to gain by lying to me. It was a Thursday afternoon when Mark from accounting leaned against my desk, pretending to ask about a report. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't need to. He just said he'd seen my wife downtown the night before, dressed like she was stepping onto a stage, not a sidewalk. He mentioned the hotel bar without naming it. Said she wasn't alone. Said the man she was with didn't look like a colleague. I thanked him for the heads up and went back to my screen. Numbers don't flinch. Neither did I. That night, I didn't bring it up. I didn't test her story. She came home late, dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and turned Netflix on like background noise was a substitute for presence. She talked about investors in vague terms, about momentum, about how tired she was. She didn't ask about my day. I didn't offer it. I'd been here before, professionally. When a dataset starts to skew, you don't argue with it. You observe longer. You let it reveal its shape. The next morning, I stopped by Best Buy on my way to work. I didn't rush. I didn't explain anything to anyone. I picked up the external drive I'd been meaning to get for months, along with a few cables that belonged to my side of the desk at home. That evening, I unplugged my laptop setup after she fell asleep and moved it into the spare room. Quietly. No announcement. She didn't notice for 2 days. By the weekend, she skipped our usual Costco run again, saying she had a brunch meeting that turned into dinner. I didn't fill the fridge. I didn't remind her. I ate out, grabbed coffee on my own, learned what my mornings felt like without coordinating around someone else's calendar. There was a rhythm forming. Not chaos. Structure. When she finally commented on how quiet I'd been, she framed it like concern. She said I seemed distant. She said maybe we should talk when things slowed down for her. I told her there was no rush. That was the first time she really looked at me, like she was checking a screen that hadn't refreshed the way she expected. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt in the way she could manage. I was collecting data, and the pattern was becoming obvious. By the second week, the silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling intentional. That's when I knew it was working. I didn't snoop the way people imagine. No frantic scrolling, no shaking hands. I already had access to what mattered. Shared accounts, overlapping calendars, patterns that didn't bother hiding anymore. When someone stops worrying about being questioned, they get careless. Her schedule was a blur of late meetings and strategy dinners. The names were vague, but the timing wasn't. Certain nights always ended the same way. A location tag that lingered too long. A rideshare receipt that didn't line up with where she said she'd been. Nothing explosive, just enough repetition to stop being coincidence. At home, she moved through rooms like a guest. Laptop open, earbuds in, Netflix murmuring to an empty couch while she answered messages that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in months. She'd glance up occasionally, checking if I noticed. I didn't. One night, I stayed out later than usual. Drove around with no destination, got coffee from the same Dunkin' I'd started treating like a checkpoint between my old life and whatever this was becoming. I sat there with the engine off, watching people come and go, realizing no one knew where I was. And for the first time, that felt like control. When I got home, she asked if everything was okay. Not because she was worried, because my absence disrupted her sense of order. I told her I'd lost track of time. It was the truth. I stopped syncing my calendar, stopped mentioning deadlines. I ate when I wanted, slept when I wanted, let the house adjust to me instead of the other way around. She began hovering, asking small questions she'd never needed answered before. What time I'd be home, if I'd already eaten, if I was still watching that show we'd started together months ago. I didn't answer right away, not to punish, to observe. The evidence didn't need a confrontation. It was already doing the work for me. Each message she guarded, each call she took in another room, each time she dressed like she was leaving one life and stepping into another. I wasn't angry. Anger leaks. I was precise. By the end of that week, she sensed something slipping. Not love, not trust, access. And she didn't know how to ask for it back without admitting she'd spent months pretending she didn't need it. The shift became visible the moment I stopped orbiting her life. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I just rearranged my days so they no longer bent around her schedule. Mornings started earlier. Evenings ended elsewhere. The house stopped being a checkpoint and became a place I passed through. She noticed it in fragments. The fridge staying half empty because I hadn't gone to Costco. The way Netflix kept running without me sitting beside her. The screen throwing light onto a couch that felt too big now. The absence wasn't loud. That's what made it unsettling. I stopped syncing locations. Stopped sending on my way texts. When I drove the Camry out of the driveway, I didn't look back to see if she was watching. I already knew she was. By midweek, she started adjusting her tone. Less sharp, more neutral. She asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I said I'd already eaten. That was true. I had. Alone. And I didn't feel the need to explain where. She started coming home earlier. Not early enough to be present, just early enough to check if I was still predictable. I wasn't. One night, she tried to manufacture normal. She sat closer, asked about my work, mentioned a future trip in abstract terms, like it was still a shared asset. I listened without interrupting, nodded where appropriate, and went to bed at my usual time. She stayed awake. I could feel it. By the end of the week, her messages changed. Short check-ins during the day, casual questions framed like jokes. She wasn't chasing intimacy. She was checking connectivity, making sure the signal was still there. It wasn't. I wasn't disappearing from the house. I was disappearing from her leverage. She couldn't provoke a reaction because I wasn't reacting. She couldn't accuse me of neglect because I was calm, polite, present enough to be undeniable. That's when the panic started to surface in small ways. She forgot her charger, lost track of meetings, reread texts before sending them. Her confidence began to flicker, not because she'd lost something tangible, but because she couldn't feel me anchoring her anymore. She had mistaken my presence for permanence. What she was learning now was that I had always been choosing her, and I had quietly stopped. The investor entered my life without realizing he already had. His name surfaced the way names like his always do. Casually. A comment from her about how experienced he was. A mention of doors opening faster now. Introductions that didn't require follow-ups. She framed it as momentum, not dependency. Power always sounds cleaner when you describe it that way. I didn't dig into him emotionally. I treated him like a variable. I looked at patterns, public appearances, board announcements, the way certain people attach themselves to projects right before stepping back. Men like him don't hide. They assume no one is looking closely enough to matter. I didn't confront him. That would have made him important. I didn't warn her. That would have given her something to resist. I adjusted my position instead. I removed myself from anything shared that could be leveraged. I boxed up my tech first. Drives. Accessories. The things I'd bought over the years that quietly held pieces of my life. Another calm stop at Best Buy. Another receipt that meant nothing to her and everything to me. By the time she noticed the desk was bare, it had already been empty for days. She started referencing him more often after that. Not by name. By implication. A dinner she couldn't miss. A call she had to take. The subtle suggestion that I should understand how rare these opportunities were. I told her I did. And I did. What she didn't understand was that I'd stopped competing the moment I realized it wasn't a competition. He wasn't replacing me. He was renting access. And rentals always come with conditions. At home, her confidence began to wobble. She dressed sharper, moved faster, talked louder. Lululemon outfits appeared like armor. She checked her phone more often, not because she was in demand, but because she was waiting for reassurance. I wasn't providing it anymore. The house felt different now. Not tense. Hollow. Netflix played to an empty room most nights while she paced, half present, half elsewhere. I stayed out longer, sometimes grabbing coffee late, letting Dunkin' lights blur past the windshield as I drove with no urgency. I didn't need to expose anything. Systems collapse on their own when the stabilizing element steps away. She had built her momentum on borrowed certainty, and I had been the quiet structure underneath it. When I removed myself, nothing fell immediately, but everything started leaning. The first time someone else noticed wasn't dramatic. That's what made it stick. It happened at a small gathering she insisted we attend. Not a party, more like a strategic room. People she needed to be seen by. People who measured relevance by proximity. I went because I said I would, not because I wanted to. She moved ahead of me the moment we arrived. Not intentionally. By habit. I let the distance form. I stood where I was, hands relaxed, watching her recalibrate when she realized I wasn't following. Conversations stalled around her. Not because she lacked charm, but because something was off. She kept glancing back at me like I was a missing slide in her presentation. I didn't step in. I didn't rescue the flow. I spoke when spoken to. Then I stepped away. Someone asked how we were doing. The question wasn't invasive. Just routine. She answered too quickly, too brightly. I said nothing. Silence is a language people understand instinctively. Later, one of her friends pulled her aside. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw the shift in her posture when she returned. Shoulders tighter. Smile thinner. She stood closer to me after that, as if proximity could re-establish the story. It didn't. On the drive home, she talked more than usual, filled the space, mentioned how busy things had been, how we needed to get back to normal. She brought up Costco like it was a symbol, not a store. Said we hadn't gone together in weeks. I told her I hadn't needed anything. At home, Netflix went on automatically. Neither of us watched. She sat there scrolling, stopping, starting again, waiting for me to say something that would restore balance. I went to the other room and closed the door. The next day, the text started. Not accusations. Check-ins. Where are you? Everything okay? You seem far. By the second message, the tone shifted. Where did you go? I didn't ignore her. I replied when it made sense. Hours later. Brief. Neutral. The social space she'd relied on began reflecting something she couldn't control. People sensed the disconnect. They didn't know why. They didn't need to. She wasn't losing status because of exposure. She was losing it because the man who anchored her credibility had stopped performing the role. And everyone could feel the absence, even if they couldn't name it. By the third week, the house no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a waiting room she couldn't leave. She tried filling it with noise. Netflix ran for hours without pause, episodes bleeding into each other while she sat wrapped in a blanket, phone face up on the coffee table. Not watching, listening for notifications. I passed through the room without stopping, grabbed what I needed, and kept moving. She started asking for small things. Not help. Permission. If I wanted anything from the store. If I'd be home for dinner. If I still liked the same coffee. The questions weren't about logistics. They were probes, sent out carefully, hoping to hit something solid. They didn't. I stopped being the first person she updated. I learned about her days the same way strangers do, in fragments and summaries. She noticed. Of course she did. Control doesn't vanish quietly. It resists. One evening, she dressed up and stayed in. Lululemon replaced by something softer, more familiar. She cooked. Not a performance meal. Something simple we used to make together. She set 2 plates. I ate. I thanked her. I cleared my plate and went back to my room. She didn't follow right away. When she finally did, she stood in the doorway like she was waiting to be invited into a conversation that used to be automatic. She said she felt like she was losing me. Not angrily. Carefully. Like she was afraid of the answer. I told her I'd hurt her the first time. When she said intimacy felt needy, I said I'd adjusted. That was all. She didn't argue. She just nodded, like someone receiving a diagnosis they couldn't contest. She left the room and didn't turn the TV back on. The next morning, I woke up early and drove out before sunrise. Grabbed coffee, sat in the car while the sky shifted colors, thinking about how calm everything felt now that I wasn't trying to be chosen. When I came back, she was already awake, sitting at the table, waiting. She was isolated in a way success doesn't prepare you for. Her momentum had no cushion now, no one to absorb the quiet moments when confidence falters. The investor didn't check in unless there was something to gain. Friends assumed she was fine because she always looked fine. I was the only one who saw the gap, and I was no longer stepping into it. That was the moment she realized silence couldn't be negotiated. It could only be endured. The confrontation didn't arrive with raised voices or accusations. It came quietly, the way truth usually does when there's nowhere left to hide. She waited until the house was still. No background noise, no Netflix murmuring to fill the gaps. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of me closing my laptop. She stood across from me, arms folded, not defensive, just exposed. She said she didn't recognize us anymore. Said it felt like I'd checked out without warning. Said she needed to understand where I was. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her timeline. I let her words land and fade on their own. When she finished, I told her I hadn't disappeared. I said I'd heard her clearly weeks ago. When she said closeness felt like pressure. When she said intimacy sounded needy. I told her I took that seriously. I said I stopped asking. That was the moment her composure broke. Not dramatically. Subtly. Her shoulders dropped. Her eyes searched my face for something familiar and didn't find it. She said that wasn't what she meant. That things had just been intense. That she thought I understood how important this phase was for her. I told her I did. I said I understood enough to step back. She asked if there was someone else. The question came out sharp, then softened, like she regretted asking it. I shook my head. I said I'd been alone more than ever. That seemed to confuse her more than any accusation could have. She said she missed us. Missed how steady things used to feel. Missed knowing where I was without having to ask. She said the house felt wrong now. Too quiet. Like something essential had been removed. I didn't argue with that either. I told her stability only works when both people protect it. That when one person treats connection like a resource to be rationed, the other eventually learns to stop requesting it. She sat down after that. Not defeated. Just tired. Like someone realizing they'd miscalculated something basic. Later that night, I went for a drive. No destination. Just movement. Grabbed coffee out of habit. The same Dunkin' cup warming my hand as I sat in the parked car. Phone face down. Notifications silent. When I came back, she was still awake. Sitting where I'd left her. She didn't ask me to stay. She asked where I'd gone. And for the first time, she didn't sound angry. She sounded afraid. Her collapse didn't look like failure from the outside. That's the part most people misunderstand. She was still getting dressed. Still going to meetings. Still posting carefully framed moments that suggested momentum. But inside the house, the structure was gone. The silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was accusatory. The investor stopped calling as often. Not abruptly. Gradually. Fewer check-ins. Longer gaps. When power senses instability, it reallocates. She felt it before she admitted it. You could see it in how often she refreshed her phone, how quickly confidence drained from her posture when nothing lit up the screen. Friends assumed she was busy. Successful people are allowed to disappear without explanation. No one asked if she was okay. They never do when the image still holds. At night, Netflix kept playing, but she didn't sit through entire episodes anymore. She'd pause, rewind, stop altogether. Like she was trying to remember when the house had last felt occupied instead of staged. Sometimes she'd sit in the dark long after the screen went black. That's when the memories started hitting her. Not all at once. In fragments. Me folding laundry without being asked. Me doing the Costco runs she'd complained about but never replaced. Me sitting quietly next to her when she worked, not talking, just there. At the time, she'd called it background. Now it surfaced like proof. She started noticing what wasn't happening anymore. No coffee waiting in the mornings. No texts reminding her to eat. No steady presence absorbing the low moments when ambition sags under its own weight. One night, she admitted she didn't know who she could lean on now. She said the people who opened doors didn't stay once you stepped through them. They just pointed to the next one and disappeared. I listened. I didn't fill the space. She asked if I remembered when we used to plan weekends instead of pitches, when normal felt sufficient, when intimacy wasn't something to be optimized or deferred. She said she hadn't realized how much of her life had been stabilized by things she'd dismissed as basic. I told her nothing about forgiveness, nothing about blame. I said understanding usually comes after loss, not before. The next morning, I left early, drove the same route, same car, same quiet, grabbed coffee and sat alone, thinking about how strange it was that I felt lighter now that she felt heavier. Her world hadn't collapsed loudly. It had hollowed out. And she was finally standing inside the echo. The end didn't announce itself. It settled in, quietly, the way decisions do when they've already been made. She stopped trying to fix things with words. There were no more explanations, no reframing, no urgency dressed up as clarity. What replaced it was something rawer. Presence without leverage. Attention without strategy. One evening, she sat across from me and said she finally understood what she'd done. Not the affair itself. The trade. She said she'd confused ambition with detachment, thought that needing less made her stronger. She said she hadn't realized how much she'd relied on the stability I provided while convincing herself she'd outgrown it. I listened, the same way I had all along. She said she missed being chosen without having to perform, missed being known without having to pitch, missed the version of herself that didn't calculate every interaction. She said that version only existed with me. I didn't correct her. I didn't validate it either. I told her something simple. I said intimacy isn't a demand when it's mutual, that when one person labels connection as neediness, the other eventually learns how to survive without it. I said I hadn't vanished. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She nodded like she already knew that sentence would end things, one way or another. The next morning, I packed lightly. Not everything, just enough. I left the house clean. No notes. No dramatics. The Camry pulled out of the driveway the same way it always had. Smooth. Unremarkable. Final. I stopped for coffee out of habit. Dunkin' again. Same cup. Same quiet. I sat there longer than necessary, not thinking about her, just noticing how still my body felt now that it wasn't braced for disappointment. She texted me later that day. Just one message. Where did you go? I didn't answer right away. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. When I did respond, hours later, it was short. I said I hadn't gone anywhere dramatic. I said I chose distance the moment closeness became something I had to justify. There was no reply after that. I don't know what she tells people now. Maybe that we grew apart. Maybe that timing was off. The story doesn't belong to me anymore. What I know is this. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't disappear to be chased. I didn't make noise to be heard. I walked away with my self-respect intact. And I never needed her again. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.